So there you are, trying to have a discussion about the various horrible things that happen in the Warcraft setting, whether or not something went too far, if it was handled with the weight it deserved, or if the narrative itself acknowledged that what happened was kind of messed up. And in crashes some random person to scream everyone down with,
"The game is called Warcraft."
Now, there's something inherently petulant about this retort. Like a child had their playtime interrupted and now they're going to make sure that you know they're upset. And if you just want to play a game with no narrative substance to it, then fine, do that, but don't play a game with decades of lore attached to it and pretend there's nothing to look at. Further still, if you think World of Warcraft's narrative isn't worth analysing because of its questionable quality, why even insert yourself into the conversation? It is okay to just not say anything if the conversation doesn't apply to you. Unless you're here to feel smug and superior for recognizing WoW is subpar, which isn't difficult. At least I assumed it wasn't difficult, but there are so many people who seem to genuinely think that Shadowlands and the story beats that led up to it were flawless, so who f***ing knows? Firstly, I want to address the personal attack angle just to get it out of the way, because for some, when they see people discussing the problematic or uncomfortable aspects of a story, they feel defensive, assuming that the discussion is a teardown of why thing they like is bad and wrong, and so they are bad and wrong for liking it. This is usually not what's happening, and if someone does try to make you feel like you're a bad person for liking a piece of media with no other information about who you are, they're just trying to feel better about themselves by posturing about purity. Within reason, of course. I mean, if you like fash music, that's gonna be high-key suspicious, my guy. Point is, if you genuinely feel personally attacked when something you like is criticized, that's not an uncommon feeling, but it is your responsibility to recognize that criticism of something you enjoy is not criticism of you unless explicitly stated, and that should not be on the person making the argument. If you just come across someone's critical analysis of a thing you enjoy, it isn't about you as a person. If you don't agree with their analysis, then say so. Use your words to construct an argument that makes sense and don't make it personal. Now, let's move on to the less forgivable thing, shall we? There's two parts to this next one, where one side says it because they wrongly assume that you want the offending content removed, and the other side just wants to play a Warhammer ripoff where everything is horrible all the time and justice and ethics are little more than fairy tales, which at that point just go play Warhammer. The most commonly held idea by people who scream "it's called Warcraft" seems to be that because it's war, that means horrible things are going to happen by default, a "what were you expecting" response, as if you shouldn't take issue with those horrible things because that's what war is, so who cares, I guess? The problem is that in the real world, we agreed on a whole bunch of actions taken during war that are dishonorable or vile enough to be considered crimes. You know, crimes committed during war. War crimes, if you will. And some might say that those kinds of morals don't exist in Azeroth because you're under the misguided impression that medieval times on Earth have anything to do with our made-up fantasy world. But even if it did, it's important to remember that SA was punishable by castration, so even people living under fear of witchcraft knew that forcing yourself on someone was heinous. Not to mention that we literally got a whole-ass book called War Crimes, where Garrosh Hellscream was put on trial for war crimes, and the author openly said that she based it off the Nuremberg trials, which is its own separate can of worms that we are not going to get into here. So back to the point, here are just some of the things from World of Warcraft that have been condemned in the real world.
Ethnic cleansing, torture, use of poison, use of chemical and biological weapons, massacre of unarmed enemies, prisoner of war executions, mutilation of enemy bodies, trophy collection, internment camps, genocide, intentionally launching an attack in the knowledge that such attack will cause incidental loss of life or injury to civilians or damage to civilian objects, or widespread.
Are we the baddies?
Yes. War will bring out the worst in people, and without strict ethical guidelines to wrench some kind of accountability out of the muck afterwards, it would be worse still. War doesn't mean you automatically have carte blanche to do whatever hideous thing to the other side and it's fine because war. War means that all other forms of communication and diplomacy have failed and people are going to die. Families are going to be torn apart. Children are going to be made orphans, bodies are going to be broken, and a generation of people will be traumatized. It is a terrible, destructive thing. So why take such a cavalier attitude to making it worse? We don't just hand-wave things that happen in real-world conflicts with, well, that's war, and not try to seek accountability for it. At least that's what we hope will happen, because there are a lot of things different countries have done to each other that will either take a very long time to get adequate accountability for, or they never will.
If you can't handle mature stuff, go play a My Little Pony game.
This is honestly the funniest response I've seen to people criticizing the way darker aspects are handled in Warcraft. Like, just think about what this retort is actually saying.
If you bother to think critically about the war crimes in the fantasy game about war, you're an immature snowflake who should play children's games. Mature adults just consume media without engaging a single brain cell about anything put in front of them.
The people who use this particular part of the argument are so blissfully unaware of how absurd it is. But that's only if they genuinely think people criticizing the darker aspects of Warcraft want those darker aspects scrubbed until the game is safe for those aged 3 and up. What is far more likely, in my experience at least, is that the people using this specific angle see it as a political issue, in the same vein that when asked if the game would be political, developers of Call of Duty, a modern war game dealing with themes of terrorism, nationalism, independence, colonialism, and a whole host of other very normal, safe topics, answered, no, it's not political. You know, that absolutely absurd definition of political that means this piece of media has a kind of person or viewpoint that I don't like, therefore it is political and also bad. I'm waiting for the day that this tweet will no longer be relevant. And just on a personal level, as someone who is into spooky things, gruesome true crime, creepy mysteries, and horror in general, it's just very funny when these people show up and assume that I criticize because I can't handle the dark parts of Warcraft. Let's just ignore that some of my favourite games are Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, Telltale's The Walking Dead series, and Dishonored, games that are all famously known for their fluffy, peaceful settings where nothing horrific happens to anyone ever. I'm reminded of Jacob Geller's video, Designed for Violence, wherein he links the way environmental design in games train you to prepare for a fight in certain locations to the architectural designs American schools are beginning to adopt in order to reduce fatalities in the event of a violent incident. We are very good at internalizing the messages our environment gives us, and for a lot of the time in World of Warcraft the morality of action taken is glossed over at best or glorified at worst. World of Warcraft is often designed to encourage your apathy towards clearly intelligent targets because they are intentionally written to be drooling evil savages who can't be reasoned with, but that is very much a choice made by the writers. Why can't they be reasoned with? Why are all of them like this, as if being evil and savage is biologically hardwired? We can kill quest fodder races all day and night 24/7 and it's nothing to concern ourselves over, right up until the game suddenly decides that actually doing these things is bad, but only when it's this particular story beat where we ruin several characters at once and kick multiple sections of the player base at once. Not that Teldrassil didn't also allow a disturbing amount of people to fly their vicarious fash flags by taking to social media. and gloating about all the night elves they killed. Haha, isn't it fun when I talk about gleefully taking part in genocide, but it's not real, bro, don't be so serious. Fuck you. I am once again expressing how f***ing exhausted that entire event made me. As both a Night Elf and Sylvanas fan, I nearly perished from edgy cringe toxicity with the amount of absolutely ghoulish behavior I had to witness with my own two good Christian eyes. I shouldn't need to say it explicitly, but I will because people will deliberately choose to believe otherwise. I don't want Warcraft to be scrubbed clean of all upsetting content. What I want, as a writer myself and an average enjoyer of good stories, is for the setting to grow up. Back in 2004, you could get away with not having professionally trained and experienced writers on the team, and you could coast for quite a while on passion and cool ideas, but video games have evolved beyond that point. Other MMOs have evolved beyond that point. Final Fantasy XIV, Elder Scrolls Online, Star Wars The Old Republic, bless its janky broken soul. And hell, if you want one that deals with dark, messy things by default, The Secret World is an 18+ horror MMO, and I loved it. My problem is not with the dark content, it is with the lack of consistency and spine around that content. You can't just have the player torture the shit out of an indigenous person and gloss over the morality of it without tacitly saying, this was a morally okay thing to do. If you've ever made a Death Knight, then you might remember how dark an introductory questline we went on. Which makes perfect sense. You're in service to the Lich King, a champion of the Scourge. You're a monster, and the story doesn't shy away from that. However, we do these kinds of things pretty regularly now. Sure, none of the designated quest fodder races scream in fear and terror the way Scarlet Crusade laborers did, but why? The Scarlet Crusade is an extremely fascist group of xenophobic religious zealots, but they have civilians who aren't trained to fight, so we can feel bad about butchering them as Death Knights. And the quest fodder, who have their own differing levels of industrial needs, have no non-combatant laborers or gatherers who scream in terror when we're set to butcher our way through their homes. Why? Again, this is a choice by the writers, and it's a questionable one. You torture a xenophobic crusader as a Death Knight for information, and it's horrible. You torture a native as a low-level adventurer in the Barrens for information, and it's justified. Of course, if you don't see a problem with doing the latter, because Quilboar are violent savages and something Mancrick's wife, then I doubt anything I say will actually matter to you. It doesn't have to be some intense spectacle of interrogation and introspection. Just ask why something is the way it is. Be curious and open-minded about the media you consume. When it comes to food, your diet affects your body, and those effects can be altered by other things like exercise, good sleep, and stress levels. The same is true for your mind. Regardless of what you are consuming, your media diet affects how you think in gradual, subtle ways. There's a very good video made by Matt Lees about this, and I will link it in the description. And with that, I scuttle back to working on the Netherstorm video. I just had to get this out of my system because certain commenters keep trying to counter my quest fodder video with this offensively empty attempt at a retort. Special shoutouts to my supporters on Patreon, who are all very handsome people, and especially to my newest patrons, Young Corgi and Violet. Thank you all for watching, don't forget to drink your water, take your medication, and I will see you next time.